So hello everyone, my name's Dr. Isaac Teitz. I am the head psychologist of All Mind Health. It is a clinical psychological services corporation for all of California in telehealth and in person. We see kids and families as well as regular old adults as well as service members. Perfect timing, thank you very much. Don't worry, the war's over. It's all good.
I'm awake now.
It's so fun.
I'll sit down now. You have to be ready for everything when you're a spy. So, like I was saying, we work with kids and families, adults and service members. So basically just nerds of all ages on a variety of issues such as anxiety, insomnia, trauma. And by all means, I'm going to pass it on to my associate.
Hello, I'm Dr. Kayla Joseph. I'm a queer non-binary psychologist out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and I work mostly with adults in a few different healthcare systems. I also study fandom, particularly LGBTQ+ representation in fandom, and I have a book out called Fandom Acts of Kindness, A Guide to Activism, Advocacy, and Doing Chaotic Good. I also have a chapter that I'm plugging in a new book about the series The Boys that is called Soups Ain't Always Heroes.
Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Smith-Han, and that's my American name. My Korean name is Han Pang-shil, and I am considered 1.5-ish generation, meaning I moved to the States in early childhood. So 1.5-ish generation Korean American licensed clinical psychologist. I am also very neurodivergent, and a lot of the people I work with have a variety of marginalized identities. So neurodivergent, LGBTQIA+, racial as well, culturally, a variety of I'm not great at talking about myself. Yeah, so I work with a lot of folks, mostly through telehealth right now. I can do telehealth in over 40 states and working on getting that California licensure. And I work with a lot of people, a lot of different presentations, military backgrounds, trauma backgrounds, sexual assault, people who are late diagnosed, neurodivergent, anxiety, lots of fun things. And we oftentimes use a lot of fandom in our sessions because it's fun and it's effective.
Hi, my name is Lorraine Garrison. I am a school psychologist out in the Bay Area now. I used to live in San Diego, but now I'm up there, and I'm at a very neurodivergent charter school, which has been fantastic. So I grew up on the island in Guam. I'm half Vietnamese, half Filipino, but my father who raised me is Black, and so I have a lot of that culture in my background. I usually talk at San Diego Comic-Con, WonderCon, California Associations of School Psychologists. I will be talking at the National Association of School Psychologists on the intersectionality of being Black, BIPOC, Black Indigenous person of color, neurospicy, and also on queer issues and that intersectionality and how those points really matter.
I am Brittany Oliver Cias Navarro. I'm a marriage and family therapist from San Diego. I'm a grief and loss, I hate the term expert, but researcher, aficionado, advocate, all of those other things. That's my specialty. I work with transitional age youth, so TAY, so it's 16 to 25. And then I'll be Dr. Brittany next week. Woo! Hopefully. And but besides that, I'm just so happy that we have this nerdy group that's just amongst us, and I'm so glad to be welcome to be here, and thank you so much.
My name is Benjamin Teitz. I am a registered psychological associate. I'm a psychology doctoral candidate. I will be doctor next year. Whoa. Wow. I am the co-host of two mental health podcasts, one called Mental Health Quest, The Therapist's Office and Beyond, and also My Hero Therapy, where we talk about My Hero Academia and psychology and everything. Those are found all over podcast land.
To get started, we're going to talk about identity. And each of these characters has their own sense of identity, what they show others, what they hide from others. And what happens when their sense of self is shattered? How do they manage their self-esteem? I'm going to start with Kayla.
One of the things that is really, really interesting about this show is because they're all hiding these various aspects of their identities, they're also playing into societal role expectations in a very particular way that is really similar to how neurodivergent people mask, and also really similar to how queer people, for example, might mask things about their identities before they are out to others. And so one of the things that has really struck me about the show and gotten me more into the show is watching how they navigate some of the societal expectations like gender roles. I mean, the entire reason they sort of have to get into this fake marriage is because of gender roles and gender expectations. And you see all of these little like misstep moments, like thinking, oh, is you're developing feelings for me? I need to do something about that. And how when they just let themselves actually be themselves, things go a lot smoother.
So absolutely, when it comes to hiding aspects of our identities, otherwise called masking, and it is something that is experienced in various levels for different people in different ways. So that can be that there's this term of code switching or masking when it comes to how we present as far as relating to the dominant culture that we're in, and how much so that can be experienced through acculturation, as well as for folks who are trying to adhere to a white supremacy model or trying to appear like those who are in power as much as possible. That also happens for neurodivergent folks trying to present as allistic or not autistic, as well as not ADHD or not dyslexic or not really showing parts of yourself. There's a really wonderful book that I'll plug from Devin Price called Unmasking Autism. It is pretty phenomenal. Yeah, it's a great book.
Dr. Price, yes.
Dr. Price is pretty awesome in a lot of ways. And also an understanding that when we're having to hide a lot of parts of ourselves, there is trauma related to that. So one thing is that when it comes to attachment or how we attach to a caregiver or to someone that we care about, one of the things about that is it's done a lot of ways for survival. So for an infant, a child who's not able to care for themselves, can't lift up their own head, can't roll over, can't sit up, all of these things, the child needs to have the adult caregiver caring for them. And so part of that is, right, how are our needs met? And so for the biological needs, to get them met, the caregiver needs to want to do those things, right? They need to want to care for the babies. So we have our kind of more biological needs that need to be met. But then we also have an innate need for authenticity and being who we are. And one of the really tough things about this is if our authentic selves, if we think that that is going to threaten our ability to attach with our caregiver and our caregiver is not going to care for us anymore, that then is a trauma that happens. It's an attachment trauma that occurs because we have to hide this part of ourselves in order to have our needs met. And that gets stored within the body and in our nervous systems in different ways, and it comes up. That's absolutely going to be a part of why it's hard for someone to not feel that love and that connection with a caregiver.
Well, as a school psychologist, I really appreciate this because it's a blending of what I see in schools and how it interacts with the parents. And of course, you know, my favorite character is Anya because like Anya is a joy, but then, you know, I can see like how, you know, her obvious unidentified ADHD and learning disabilities and problems, you know, a lot of kids can relate to. And so this is my jumping off point when I talk to kids. I'm like, oh, what's your favorite, you know, what are you a fan of? Every single kid has some sort of fandom, whether it's sports, movies or any other character. And when, you know, I have someone who tells me, you know, their favorite character is Anya, I'm like, bingo, okay, let's go down this rabbit hole. Tell me more, you know, like why, how can you relate and all of those things, right? So I think identity is very important because like if a student is struggling with, you know, learning disabilities or anything like that, they can identify with these characters, and I can show them the trajectory, like even in the story, even like I have a lot of kids who love Naruto, One Piece, Demon Slayer. Like I've started to watch anime because, my kids are the students I work with are interested in it. And I'm like, I don't know these characters, but tell me more. Tell me more. Why do you relate to Spider-Man? Why are you cosplaying as Spider-Man? Like Mr. over there. I want to know. I'm curious, about that other person, and where can I help them, help these children, people, little people, like self-actualize. That's what I'm interested in doing. Tell me what makes you you, so that I can help you become the best person that you can be.
I really do think that this is an example of performative parenting, regardless if it's real or imagined. Because although this is truly performative parenting, I think that in our real lives, there are times in which our parents have failed us, times in which they've not been sufficient, or they've let us down. And so, like, I think about the episode in which, like, Anya gets berated for trying to go into a bedroom, and then there's an opportunity for apology. And so, like, even though we're talking about identity, I also want to hit on self-esteem. And so you have this moment in which she gets berated and she's crying, and there's a recognition that I'm performative parenting, but I can at least have the empathy to understand that a child is hurting. And so the reconciliation is I'm going to come towards, not away from. And so we have a joyous moment in which we can build self-esteem. And so I think that there's a lot of ebbs and flows in this series in which there are times where each of them hurt each other, and then they have opportunities to rebuild. And so, like, in attachment theory or for therapy, like, we would call that a rupture and a repair. So we rupture this relationship in some way. She tries to touch the door. How dare you? You're bad. And then I can actually apologize. And I think that that's the biggest thing, like, to take away from a parent dynamic, is that you should and could apologize to a child when necessary. I definitely want to advocate for the tiny humans in the world as being a TAE clinician. And so I think that with self-esteem building specifically here, you see that with affirmations, sometimes silently and sometimes very loud. And I really do appreciate that, even though it's not there consistently, not there all the time, it is there. And so it's trying to find out where it is in the middle.
That was all amazing, and I agree. Yes, just done. I wanted to kind of bounce off that because with the performative piece, you're performing towards an ideal. And sometimes people think that, oh, well, this is the identity I should have or I want to have. But when we struggle to match that ideal, it can really impact our self-esteem, because then we start thinking we're not good enough. And I see this a lot with Yor especially, that she started thinking, okay, well, maybe I should be more of this housewife figure. But she struggles with it, and that's totally fine. Not all women are that mold, and that's totally okay. But she's like, okay, well, how do I do this? And I feel like I'm a failure. But her way of matching with herself is like, well, I do have these strengths. I can do these things. And look, I can protect my child and catch these bad guys. And what she did when she was chasing after Anya, who got, taken away, and she's like, getting with these bad guys, called in the police, done, let's go home and have some ice cream. And so I think that she had this idea in her head of what kind of identity she wanted to portray, what does she want to embody, and she struggled with her self-esteem, and can I do that? And she was able to find, and she's still finding, her, way of being that identity and building that self-esteem in that.
Absolutely. Plus, she was a great big sister to her younger brother after their parents passed away. And there's a lot of imposter syndrome. And one of the really great things about this is that all of the characters have such great strengths, and a lot of times they don't realize it, or they don't really remember or recognize that part of it. And the amount of compassion that each character tries to show one another is really humbling and very wholesome as well.
With yours specifically, there's this piece around
that authenticity of the empathy that comes across, and she's trying so hard to fit that expectation around things like cooking, which does not go well. But when she just lets herself like give parenting advice to Lloyd, for example, she's embodying all those things that are those expectations without trying to. It's when she tries to meet that thing that it's not working.
We're also talking about how are our characters communicating with each other. How do adults, speak to their kids? How do the adults speak with each other about, raising this spy family? So I wonder if we can talk about talking. What are some examples of either good communication or a fixable part of communication, or even to how to communicate boundaries we've seen in this show? For example, we have Lloyd practicing very meticulous communication skills, developing whole trees of dialogue for his colleagues to get through in order to successfully go through a date. That's a lot. I don't know about you guys, I don't think that far ahead when I'm chatting with folks. It's a lot of improvisation. So we're going to start with Liz and go down the line for some examples of either your or other characters communicating and boundaring.
Each one of the characters tries to understand each other, and they're constantly getting it wrong, even with mind reading abilities. And it's so comical, and it's so great, and so realistic in so many ways, because as humans, we're oftentimes trying to connect, and we oftentimes do miss the mark. And it's not about getting it right 100% of the time. It is about, and if we go into theory, it's about 1/3 of the time that we're actually attuned to someone, and about 1/3 of the time that we're not. And what's really important and crucial is that 1/3 of the time that we're trying to make that repair, and that we're trying to get it right. And that's a huge, huge part of it. So as they are communicating in various ways, whether it is some of the acts of service that they're doing for one another, or giving each other space and not asking certain invasive questions, to how they lose their temper with one another, or their anxiety and emotion gets the best of them.
What I tell my students, I think that's really important about this, and it's very subtle, but they keep trying. And, on the surface level, they keep trying because it's a pretend family. But, on the surface level, when they have that pretend family and they're trying to look like the perfect family, they're actually succeeding at actually trying to communicate with one another and trying to make themselves clear, because they really don't know each other. And sometimes when we end up in relationships, we make assumptions and we mind read, and that's how the arguments start, is because we assume, because we think we're in that other person's mind, and the other person will be like, no, I don't want chocolate today. I don't want that. And you get this huge fight about, like, he got me chocolate ice cream instead of cookie dough. I mean, like, ridiculous things like that. And this is what I love about the communication. And even though Anya does mind read, and even though Bond does see into the future, it's not always right. So regardless of the superpower or not, they're still human characters.
Did you read my mind?
Yes, I did.
I was about to say, like, who are our animal people here? Because I was thinking about, like, the communication, and, like, thinking of when Anya, like, slams the door, like, in Bond's face, and said, like, puppy face. I'm so sorry. And thinking that this communication, like, it plays not even on a human level, it plays on an everything level. Of, I'm going to express myself in some way, my dissatisfaction, my frustration, my misunderstanding, my whatever, fill in the blank that you want. And these types of things mean something, not just to you, but they mean things to every single entity in your life. And I think that was just kind of like a really sad moment, like, because even though it's not even a person, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and it's like you have this moment of the clarity of this person feels alone, this entity feels alone.
Sentient being is feeling alone, right? Yeah.
And that's horrible. Mm-hmm. And so you feel yourself in that moment of when you got the door slammed in your face. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of communication is, like, really interesting to play, like for the individuals who chose that scene, because they didn't have to. But it was meaningful in some way to say, like, here's someone who is so powerful in the family, they come on, and yet felt so little in that moment. And, like, what does that mean for every character then? Like, is every character going to have a moment of weakness, essentially?
I'm going to quickly follow up with the Bond thing, because there was another scene with Bond expressing, his communication of, I need comfort. There was a scene, it was after Anya got back from the zoo.
With the penguin.
And with the lion
panda.
stuff and the panda. And Bond is
Or
feeling,
penguin.
kind of like neglected. And so he's trying to like stretch his neck to look like a giraffe and puff up his head to look like a lion, but it's hard for him and it's hurting him. And Yor is recognizing, Bond just wants to be loved, also wants to be just part of this conversation too. And she's stroking his fur. And then Anya is able to recognize, Bond said I need attention and got what he needed. I would like my hair stroked too, and got her hair stroked, and it was really nice. So it shows that so many ways to communicate our needs, not always verbally, because not all of us can be verbal about our needs, but there are so many ways that we can express it. To say, I just need a hug. I just need space. I need my hair brushed. And then going on the opposite end of people who are not communicating their needs, I can't remember the kid's name. The other spy who's madly in love with Lloyd.
Nightfall.
Nightfall. She clearly, wants to tell him how important he is. She's problematic, but she wants to say this. You're important to me. I care about you deeply. I think that I could give you what I think you need. So no communication there. And she's acting under assumptions and acting under a false sense of like expectation, and it doesn't get her needs met. And so if we are able to get out of that assumption mode and that entitlement mode and just say, this is what I would like, this is how I'm feeling, we're more likely to get the things that we want and need out of the interaction, out of the communication, out of the relationship.
And it's so interesting with Ned, like for her specifically, why she's boo. Like she doesn't communicate, and then she backs off, and then she backs back on,
And she gets mad at him for not knowing what she wants.
And Yor's upset, like, do you want to replace me? And then she needs validation. So there's all of these like webs of confusion. And something that I regularly say is like our brains are so powerful. We create the reality in which we live in every single day. And so each of them are living in a separate reality of maybe he doesn't want me, even though he reinforces that he does. And maybe he will want me, even though he reinforces that he doesn't. And so it's so curious to me, like how communication can be so mishandled sometimes with adults.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, yes.
Well, and I think counter to that, we have that beautiful scene after Yor knocks Lloyd out. We have this big misunderstanding, but it culminates in I think one of the most touching scenes of the series where they're having that beautiful conversation on the park bench about what their insecurities are. And they're direct about what their insecurities are. And even though there's a lot they're still not saying, the core pieces of those attachment needs that need to be met there are being met there.
And even though Yor was too drunk to remember the conversation.
A few times.
But like also that
problematic.
yeah, there's a lot of apology, even Bond apologizing for ripping into the penguin and bringing Anya peanuts, to misinterpretations like Lloyd trying to make Yor happy because he thinks that she's super upset. And what he doesn't realize is she has a bullet wound in her butt, right? and they go on this whole day, adventurous, romantic date just for her. And it's a lot of miscommunication because how would he know any of that? That she's got this bullet wound or that there are these other things that are going on. And each character is trying so hard to fit into these relationships in so many ways. And what makes it really wonderful is that they don't give up on each other. So no matter what goes wrong throughout that whole day, he keeps trying. And no matter, all these different pieces, is that they keep making that attempt.
So as we're rounding out the last quarter of our presentation, we're going to do a little bit of a speed round. For this version, we're going to be talking about specific topics. Whoever specifically wants to kind of jump in and give a concise example of how any of the members of the Forger family forge their family or they foster that sense of love. We have a great example of date nights, how very important it is, even after you're quote-unquote married, to still go out on date nights and to find what it is your partner
That's
likes and make sure that you give that to them, and hopefully that they can communicate whether or not they have shrapnel. So, who has some concise examples
The castle.
of some great ways
The
we
castle.
foster family?
So the castle. Lloyd is seeing that Anya loves these spy movies so much, and there was this episode where the hostage was in a castle, and so he creates that for her, even though he's like, well, this is totally not realistic, this is not what spies do, but he sees that she enjoys it, and he kind of found himself falling into the enjoyment also. That made me cry, that episode, because it's like you're playing with your child in the way that the child wants to play. If that's not forging a healthy family dynamic, I don't know what is.
Yeah, and I want to jump in because I work with students who come from, the term back in the day was called broken families or broken homes. And so that has such a negative connotation. And so I like the idea, the concept of blended families. And so this is, to me, a really great example of how, their love, in quotation, isn't, typical. So they are trying really hard to make that work, even in the pretend story, but even within the dynamic, even with Anya, like, Mama has to do this, and, this and this and that. And so she's trying really hard to make it work, and I appreciate that a lot.
And so much of these examples are also about creating fun, whether it's adult relationships or relationships with kids or between kids. It's all about creating that sense of play as well.
On the opposite side of the fun, or where the fun can grow from or can help heal, is all of the grief and loss that many of these characters have suffered through, and how, if there's any great examples we've seen of them creating a sense of mission or purpose. As I work with children, as I work with veterans going through a very stressful, traumatic, tumultuous relationship, can be very caustic, can kind of really shake up a kid's sense of what to do, or even an adult, a veteran's idea of how can they move forward. However, if they can find what it is that they're aiming for, whether it is world peace for Anya, whether it is a world where no children will cry, like Lloyd looks for, or even yours seeking out that just healthy place so that her brother can be alive and well and thrive. These are the things that help them find what would be considered a post-traumatic growth. So, thankfully for Anya, it doesn't look like she's had too much on the trauma side, but then again, we'll find out in season 3 if we're going to get more info about that secret government operation that she was from. But any examples of growing from this grief and loss that you characters have seen?
Sure, I would like to say that, for those who don't know, the 5 stages of grief, put that away. No.
Can you tell the audience why, really briefly?
Super fast, because when it was created for my own internal experience of loss. It wasn't for how I perceive someone else dying. It was how I'm grieving myself when I'm terminal.
Yes.
So when people say you're going through the 5 stages, that's not accurate. So there's actually 16 different types of loss, or 16 types of grief. And so when I talk about grief and loss, I really do want to specify that there's a lot more than just death and dying. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of ambiguous loss. There's loss of jobs. There's loss of friendships. There's loss of opportunity for, say, for someone who gets conserved, and loss of their own ability. There's tons of different things. And so, something that, an episode that stood out for me thinking about loss was Anya, getting, like, not being able to finish the dodgeball game. Like,
Yeah.
this experience of letting him down, like, and, like, it's just, it meant a lot to me, because it's like, well, how many times have we, for lack of a better term, F something up? And for Damien, like, it's like, I trusted you, I sacrificed myself for you. And she couldn't show up, she couldn't finish. And so, and they have this relationship that ebbs and flows and everything else. And so I think that these types of losses are just as significant, especially in childhood. Like, these are the ones that really do matter, or make you or mold you as a young adult. Because not everyone's going to lose someone specifically to death or dying when they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That might come later. But when you can't figure out why you can't relate to somebody, why you can't mend a relationship, why you try so hard. I have this dog, we should be friends, like, like, I'm trying so hard to be with you. Like, those are the little bit of losses. It's a death by like 1,000 cuts, right? Like, these are the ones, especially when we think about tiny humans, that are going to be important. And so when I think about grief and loss of this case, like, I do want to make sure that that's an important part too. Yes, it's really, really easy to go towards parent loss. It's really, really easy to go towards making sure that we think about, like, sibling compassion and things like that. But there are also relationships like this that matter, that are outside of the scope of just death and dying.
Yes, I with the students I talk to all the time, I have to explain that sometimes relationships just die. So explaining that grief.
I think another thing that's really important is how common it is when there are some things going on between the parental dyad. So we know that Yor and Lloyd are not completely honest with one another. They have these secret lives. And Anya knows this. And one of the things that tends to happen for a lot of kiddos is they take on that responsibility of keeping the family unit together, which is not a child's responsibility. And that, unfortunately, does play out for her throughout, like, both seasons. That's another piece to this, because she has lived in an orphanage. We're still not sure what happened prior to that, but she does come from this traumatic past of being experimented on, not having that parental love, finally having this family unit, and trying to keep it together as a first grader. Right? Yeah.
And I want to speak to the sense of purpose piece, because they've all forged new identities and new paths forward through the sense of purpose. And I think what we're also starting to see is that sense of purpose over time starts to break down their ability to live their lives. You know, we were joking earlier when the mic dropped that the war is over. And for folks who have experienced traumas, the war doesn't necessarily end just because the actual war ended. And we see that for all of these characters. And what we tend to work on with folks in therapy is, how do you sit with that reality while also not getting so fused to, so stuck to your purpose that you lose sight of how to just live your life.
When you are looking to either help build your own psychic skills, or how to better forge your family, or just to be that imperial scholar that you know you can be, you may need a little bit of assistance on occasion, a little bit of help, a therapeutic intervention. Lloyd disguises himself as a psychiatrist, which is a perfect profession for a spy, to be able to gather intelligence, to use that knowledge of another person. I promise you, at least for my own sake, I can't speak for these other psychologists, but our role is not to spy on you, but rather to help you become that better version of yourself. And we use a few different interventions. Now, here we have 3 different examples. There is sand tray therapy, we see Lloyd doing with Anya. We see concussive therapy, which Lloyd... Ben,
Don't do that.
Hold on. We were doing a little quiz game.
Okay.
So As you can tell, concussive therapy doesn't exist. If your therapist is starting to throw fists, leave.
Immediately, please.
And then there is geek therapy. So really quickly, can someone give a very brief definition of sand-tray therapy and what one can get from it?
So with sand-tray therapy, you are allowing the child, more often the child, but it can be done with anybody, to engage in imaginative play using a sand tray with toys and other tools to just build whatever they want to build and tell you a story. And through that, they are connecting with you and are able to verbalize what's coming up for them, various emotions and situations in their life.
Exactly. It's a projective way of just sharing what's in your mind, letting yourself talk it out, and get to understand yourself a little bit better because it's no longer in your head. It's with these toys on the table. Granted, don't throw everything down. That's going to really stress out your therapist. And could we get a brief definition of geek therapy and what someone could expect to receive if they seek out geek therapy from any of us amazing geek therapists?
It would be utilizing your passions in the therapeutic modality. So whether the therapist was trained in something like CBT, for instance, then they would utilize what your passion is. So if it's Pokemon, well, let's see how we can fit some Pokemon themes into the CBT therapeutic realm. If it is narrative therapy, if it is more humanistic, relational, then it's going to go in that route. But essentially, whatever it is that you are passionate about, we're going to explore those themes, those Jungian archetypes, and what empowers you and makes this process a lot more fun and effective for you.
Thank you, Liz. Perfect definition, no notes. And so for all of us, we're going to let you ponder if you have any questions. While you are thinking if you have a question you'd like to ask, we're going to let you know once again who we are, how you can find out about us, and then we'll answer a question or two before we say goodbye. So we'll start with Kayla and go on down.
Kayla Joseph, Fandom Acts of Kindness is my book, and you can find me on social media at Always Keep Nerd Fighting or AK Nerd Fighting on most socials.
Oh, I don't really have like a professional presence. I have a Instagram, Lizzie, Lizzy, N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, and there's a link tree.
Once again, my name is Lorraine Garrison. I'm the co-founder of Little Brainstorm. You can find me at littlebrainstorm.com. You can find my books on Amazon. And if you ask me a interesting question in the hallway or whatever, you may have one of these free books.
And then I am Brittany, and on Instagram I am B Therapeutic, like Bumble.
And I'm Benjamin Tights, Mental Health Quest podcast, My Hero Therapy podcast. Mental Health Quest is MHQ podcast on all the socials, and My Hero Therapy is at My Hero Therapy.
Once again, my name is Dr. Isaac Tights. You can find me online at All Mind Health through all the socials or our website, www.allmindhealth.com. And I have some stress ball brains and business cards right here. But it looked as though we had a question.
Do you have my phone number?
So CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. This is basically where a therapist might walk you through behaviors or actions that you can do that helps kind of improve your mood, like exercising or getting to bed on time, or techniques to wind down for sleep, or the cognitive strategies, ways to think about a problem, how you think to yourself, what words or thoughts you say to yourself that might overturn depressive thoughts, replace anxious thoughts, and help you move towards the version of you that you'd like to be. What a great question.
I like to call it the little duckling. So thoughts, feelings, actions, they all follow each other. They're all little ducklings. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much. Any additional
I'm going to
questions?
send everybody.